Welcome back to Direct Response Playbook, where you get to learn all about digital marketing and specifically a whole lot about email marketing because, well, I'm a founder of an email service provider and that's what we do. So you're here because you want to learn about the difference between segmentation and personalization because they may sound very similar, but they are in fact very distinct. So I'm just going to give it to you straight. Segmentation is when you're basically chopping down your list based on criteria of that prospect, customer list, whatever. So maybe that's behavior they've done, choices they've made, things they've purchased, attributes about them, geolocation, age, income, all that kind of stuff. Whereas personalization has more to do with how do you make your messaging personalized to them using those attributes, right? So you might be pre-filling context about where they are, their name in the email, their name in the subject line, an email from them in the future, some creative, marketing, things like that. But it's basically how are you talking to them versus who are you talking to? That's kind of the core difference. But all that being said, David, why should you care about personalization and segmentation in the first place?
Yeah. So if you are taking your email marketing seriously, right, and you have been growing your list and you're starting to get into thousands of people, right, it no longer makes sense to blast your lists anymore. So segmenting, right, we're breaking it down to groups of people. And if we're just hitting the list again and again with the same broadcast email and sending to the same 30,000 people and only 5,000 of them are opening, if you don't group the openers and the engaged people away from the non-engaged people, what's going to happen is Gmail, AOL, Yahoo, the rest of them are going to say, hey, this person is not sending content relevant to our users. Therefore, they're giving a bad experience to the platform, and we're going to treat you as such and put you in the promotions tab, the social tab, the updates tab, or even the spam folder. And if you're like, okay, David, like, who cares? Like, I'm getting to the inbox. Ask your family members if they check emails in the promotions tab, right? It is a trip. So it's important to care about segmentation from a deliverability standpoint, as well as who you're talking to, man. If you're
Marketing.
talking to buyers the same way you're talking to people who just joined your email list, it's kind of weird. Are you going to talk to your wife the same way you talk to your wife on a first date, right?
Or the barista.
Or the barista, right? So there's a different level of trust. So different levels of trust have different levels of comfort. We're human beings. I know if someone proposed to me on the first date, I'd run for the hills, right? So segmenting people and having and this is where we start to get into personalization, having certain automations or sequences they are in based on the actions they took. Again, it's just like dating, right? If you're on the 10th date, you're more likely to do something more like a romantic candlelit dinner versus just hanging out at a coffee shop. Why? Because you have the relationship that justifies it, right?
The context changes.
Context is everything. And speaking of context, like why you're like, okay, David, great. That's segmentation. Personalization. Why does it matter? It makes for better. From what I've seen and from what I've tested, using first names inside of subject lines work really well. They get higher open rates. Emails themselves, I've seen they get more replies. And this is when I worked on non-newsletter lists. They get more replies when you use personalization. Even if that reply is, hey, how do you know my name? It's like, well, you gave it to us, man. And replies, though, good or bad, are fantastic for deliverability and staying out of the spam folder for that individual, right? So that's a huge reason why, from what I've seen in my experience, why personalization is important. And Travis, like, what have you seen in your experience from both?
Yeah, I think you nailed it on the head with the segmentation. I think most people actually think about segmentation about who am I talking to, but they don't necessarily think about the deliverability lever that's at play there. So that's a big one for sure. On the personalization, it allows to talk to someone as an individual. So we think about when you're writing an email, like how's the email even formatted, right? There's a whole reason that we think the direct response style is a lot more effective than the quote newsletter style. And I'm not, what I mean by that is just like highly branded, column, colored, that kind of thing, right? And the reason that the direct response style tends to outperform is because it's more like a human talking to a human. And how do you take that experience further? Well, you make it how a human would write to another human. You put in their name, you put in attributes about them that you know about them that shows that the connection is deeper. And from just a pure marketing perspective, personalization is really great because if you're trying to send them to, let's say, a webinar page or a secondary step, you can actually use those personalization variables to pre-populate oftentimes where they're going. So not only the experience in the email is personalized, but using the information you have in your email database with your email service provider to personalize the rest of their experiences that start from email. Right? So you can personalize the page they land on. You can pre-fill another opt-in form. You can pre-fill a checkout page, right? There's a lot of things you can do to reduce friction, increase conversions, and make their life overall easier because you know about the data already. And if you know about it, why should you ask them for it again? It seems kind of dumb. It's kind of like when you're on a support line and every time you get transferred, they ask you to reconfirm who you are. And you're like, I've just done that 4 times before you transferred me. Why are you asking me again? That's where the benefit comes, in my opinion, people don't necessarily think about, is that it becomes the hub and spoke of your personalization, not just how you're talking in the email itself.
Yeah, it's absolutely brilliant. And I think the best part with, ESPs such as Campaign Refinery, which is brilliant, I suggest you check it out. There are ways to do this that are just so simple. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? As far as personalization, right? Every ESP I've seen, they have some way of inserting the person's first name, last name, any type of custom fields, but just using their first name, that takes seconds to implement, right? So that's something you can do today, like now, while you're still listening to this, right? And another thing you can do if you're like, well, David, I have an entire list, David and Travis, how do I segment it? I'm like, first thing, people who have opened in the last 60 days and the people who have not, right? And the people who have not, you can try and re-engagement, but from what I've seen, most of them are as good as gone, right? So even just that, huge difference, huge. And I promise most people don't do it. So you will already be ahead.
100% agree. We usually start around 30-day openers, but then we kind of ride, left or right of that bubble. But then some brands that have really good brand affinity, but a small list, maybe they email a whole lot, or they email infrequently. Sometimes you can stretch that out quite a bit. I've seen 6 and 12 month work for some brands, but
Wow.
that's the exception, not the rule. Most people are between, 14 and 60 days. Somewhere in that spectrum is usually sort of the sweet spot where you can have a healthy open and click rate, but that's a whole deliverability discussion we can have another day. If you want to read more about this topic, though, we actually have a link down below to a really well-researched document that you can send to your boss. If you don't want to send them this video, you just want to sound smart, you can send them the link to the blog post, and so they can read about it as well. But if you want to learn more, we've got links to all our stuff in the description. David, any parting words?
Get to it. Don't just listen.
All right. Like, subscribe, check out what David's got going on in the newsletter world. And if you have questions about deliverability, check out Campaign Refinery. We'd love to chat with you. All right. Talk soon.